C.S. Lewis is my favorite author, and he is well known for so many books. A series that I think needs to be talked about more is his space trilogy. They are just incredible. And now that I've reviewed all three books in the trilogy, I'm going to rank all three worst to best. If you have read C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, how would you rank them? Let's do that in the comments. Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is my ranking of all three books in C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. I picked up this space trilogy for the first time when I was in college, and I absolutely loved it. Being a Christian, being raised a Christian, always loving sci-fi fantasy, you know what was cool was to see C.S. Lewis with his imagination from a Christian perspective explore life on other worlds. What would that look like? So if you're looking for some excellent Christian sci-fi fantasy, I recommend C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. Number 3, Out of the Silent Planet. This one is at number 3 only because out of all three books, for me, this is the slowest paced book. But I don't mean that as a negative towards the book. I like the slow pace because it's an incredibly fascinating read because it's exploring new worlds, it's exploring the idea of alien life on other planets, and it's doing it from the Christian perspective. And I really like how C.S. Lewis did that and was not afraid to use his imagination to bring this to life. I mean, the whole concept of this book is you have these two bad guys, Weston and Devine, and they kidnap our lead character, Ransom, because Ransom happens to be on a walkabout, on holiday, and in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because he has no wife, no kids, no family. They're like, oh, perfect. And they kidnap him to bring him as a human sacrifice to Mars. Because Weston and Devine have been to Mars a couple times at this point. They learned the language just enough, and the Martians were inviting them to come and meet the Archangel Malacandra, who rules over that planet, or is, the protector and guide of that planet. But instead of hearing it that way, in their sinful fallen nature, they jump straight to, oh, you want a human sacrifice. So that's why they kidnap Ransom. And then Ransom, finding out that he's wanted for sacrifice, runs from them when they land on Mars, and he ends up living with one of the Martian races, and he learns their language, their culture, how they live. That's why it's the slowest paced book, because it's about him living with that culture and all about what he's learning. But I find all of the subject matter of what he's learning so incredibly interesting. I mean, he learns the language they speak is also a universal language that even humans once spoke before the Tower of Babel and language was confused. He learns that there are planetary angels, archangels that rule over and protect their planets, and they protect the life that lives on those planets. And so that's an interesting concept. He learns we're called the Silent Planet because we once had commerce with the other worlds, then we fell. And once we fell, our world was pretty much quarantined to protect the other worlds from our fall. On our world is a fallen archangel who rules over it with his fallen angels. And how fallen we are comes out in the fact that Weston and Devine sit there and say, yeah, they want a human sacrifice. Like, they jump straight to that asinine idea. It's like, what is going on? And so it's very interesting what Ransom learns and how it sets the stage for the rest of the trilogy. So it's an incredibly well-written book. I find it incredibly fascinating, but it is the slower of the three. Number 2, That Hideous Strength. This book is fascinating, and I've had an equally fascinating relationship with this book. When I first read it, it was my least favorite of the three because I found it the most confusing, even though I did find it pretty interesting. As I got older and I reread it a couple times, I understood it more and more, and understanding it more and more, I ended up enjoying it more and more. I mean, look, this is infinitely thicker than the other two books. There is so much that goes on in this book, and there are so many layers. What this book does well is it takes place on Earth. The other two are Mars and Venus. This is on Earth, but this is all about a force of darkness rising up. It's about the consequences of them breaking past the lunar barrier, which is meant to be a barrier of protection, and what they call down upon themselves as they remove their own protection, this force of darkness. It's about the Pendragon and Merlin returning. It's an incredibly interesting book with so many fascinating layers that I think are even relevant today. And it's thicker, but it's way more fast-paced than the other two books. I think it starts slower, But even in starting slower, it's laying a solid foundation, and it all connects, and once it really picks up, this book really does pick up. And I think as a whole, it does a great job taking all of the ideas and stuff that happened in the other two books and bringing them to a great conclusion. Be sure to check out my full book review on this one. Number 1, Perelandra. This is the second book in the Space Trilogy, and it has long been my absolute favorite of the whole Space Trilogy. I mean, to me, it's just so completely interesting. I think what is so interesting about it to me is C.S. Lewis is trying to use his imagination to think about what did we lose when we fell? Because Venus is called Perelandra, that's its real name. Basically, it's about a new Eden and a new Adam and Eve, a new race created on Venus, and it's about their temptation. So through this book and through this story, I think C.S. Lewis is trying to give us a picture of what possibly did we lose in our fall, but it also gives us a picture of how great our redemption is through what Jesus did. Because this new race, the Adam and Eve of this new race, are created out of that new resurrection life that Jesus introduces to us through his resurrection. So it's this incredibly interesting thought, because then you're like, well, shoot, if they're created out of that incredible life, how big would that fall be if they fell? Oh, and so you have the devil who can't cross that lunar barrier, but he possesses Weston, one of the bad guys from the first book, and using Weston as a bridge, crosses over to Venus to be the serpent in the garden once again, to tempt that new Eve. But because man is fallen and is redeemed, God sends Ransom, who is a Christian, to Venus to be the representative of redeemed humanity. So in a sense, to be the angel on her one shoulder while the devil was on her other shoulder. He's trying to tempt her to fall, and Ransom's trying to be like, don't fall. I can tell you from experience, that's a bad idea. So I think this is probably one of the most interesting and most fascinating books. Plus, it's so beautifully written as C.S. Lewis uses his imagination to picture what does unfallen nature look like? What does paradise look like? It's an incredibly interesting book. As a whole, the entire trilogy is incredibly interesting, and I absolutely love it. And C.S. Lewis likes to dive into this trilogy, this awesome idea that he has. What if things that are myth and legend in our world are reality in other worlds? So it's very cool to dive into this space trilogy with C.S. Lewis and his imagination. And if you are looking for some excellent sci-fi Christian fantasy, this is an excellent trilogy for you to check out. Comes with my highest recommendation. So have you read C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy? How would you rank them? Let's talk about that in the comments. While you're there, hit that subscribe button to become a Durbanian, and hit that bell by the subscribe button so you're notified for my next ranking video, theological analysis, movie review, book review, trailer reaction, or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.